Good morning. Welcome to Viewpoint, your program of personalities, politicians, and perspective. Well, we're going to have some fun this morning. We have a personality and we have perspectives. He's not a politician. It's a good. We ought to leave that word out. That's kind of a dirty word. You ought to put that on the air. Anyway, welcome this morning, Judith. We always try to start with a kudo or two, and I'm out on the middle of the lake, and I'm going to ship my oars into water that I have no business doing this at all. I put more in somebody else's water. But I noted this morning, our friends at the rural fire department need a little help. And so they're going to have a tax referendum. And I'm just going to, I haven't read it, I don't know anything about it, except that I know that those folks out there at the rural fire department don't sit around figuring out how to waste money. And if they think we need it, I'm sure we do need it. And so I'm going to put in a plug, unannounced, unasked for the tax referendum for the rural fire department. You and I don't have to worry about that. We're here in the city. We get well taken care of by our boys here. But if you live out there around Beeston or Burkeview somewhere, maybe Broadwell, one of the three Bs, you need somebody like that when there's an emergency. So think about that, folks. You folks that are going to vote on this tax referendum, vote positively. I think it's required. So go right ahead.
I'm in.
Why don't we get down with our guest this morning?
Well, we have a famous guest with
Somerset
us today.
Mom. Isn't that what we call it? Yeah. Somerset Mom. I always figured
that goes back a ways.
Well, yes, Tom's a famous author, so we'll give him a fancy name.
There you go.
Somerset Brewster.
Yeah, Tom Brewster isn't quite as fancy as Somerset Mom, is it? Mm-hmm. Well, Tom was at one time for any number of years a gendarme here in the big city of Lincoln, and he's become an author. And I just read his first book, and called The Hung Jury. If you haven't read it yet, you've missed a good bet. Get it for yourself and read it. It's very, very good. And now he's come up with a second, The Road to Flora Dixie. And so we're going to discuss that book, and I'm sure it's every bit as good as the first one. And you've already got a plan for a third one.
Yeah, I do.
Hey, listen, you just don't let the grass grow under your feet.
Well, with no discredit to old Joe's, it's better than hanging out on there all day. You get something done positively. And by the way, I want to make sure I'm not discrediting old Joe's, not by any stretch of the imagination. Anyway, Tom, what brought up the idea for your second book? And as you answer that question, let's just go into how you developed that book, because it's an interesting concept. And here we got a boy here in Mayberry that's writing about things that happen in the big city.
In the big city.
Yeah. So go ahead, Mr. Brewster.
Well, the way that sometimes I think that people wonder, when you get to be 73 years old, why are you trying to write, and where did you get the idea that you could be successful at this? And it's something that I've actually wanted to do for 40 years. I tried writing a book back in the 70s, and I ended up shelving that book, and that was the one that eventually got published, called The Hung Jury. But I'd written another book before that called The Great American Novel, about this old gentleman that wanted to write a book, and I went through the whole process of explaining what he had done and the investigation that he did. And so anyway, it's taken me a long time to get to where I am right now. And I've been lucky enough to get these books published. And the idea that came along was that I appreciated all of the sacrifices and the heroism that the people at 9/11, the police officers and the firemen and the people that sacrificed there, and that was always present on my mind. I never really thought that these people ever got the credit that they deserved, even though they did get a lot of it. But I thought about that, and I thought all these victims in that needed to be avenged. And I still think that. And I thought, well, if there was a secret organization of these people that survived, or the people that had relatives and loved ones that perished in that fire, if they had a way to be avenged, then that would be something that a person could write about. And I always wondered why somebody didn't write about that before, because they were well funded, they got millions of dollars from the government, and so that's where I conceived the idea of coming up with this book, The Road to Flora-Dixie. And it's about a very athletic and intelligent guy. He's huge, 6'6", weighs 230 pounds, and he goes to Ground Zero to grieve because his wife and his daughters were killed at Ground Zero. And he's approached by someone that's involved in this secret organization that fights terrorism in the shadows. And so the book takes off from there. That this individual, the big guy, he's well trained. They're trained, but they're all secret, and some of them don't even know the names of each other or who's in charge of things. But they're all well synchronized and organized, and they go after these terrorists before they can strike.
I see a bestseller coming.
Well, that would be nice.
It's really intriguing to me. Mr. Brewster spent a lifetime in police officer work. Worked for us here at Lincoln, Illinois, under John Wadetsky, who was chief of police at that time. Boy, that goes back a day or two. What year was that, Tom?
Well,
years.
Well, I went to work on the Lincoln Police Department when I was 24 years old, and my daughter was born the day that I went to work.
Is that right?
I went to work on the evening shift, and back in those days, we all had to do not an internship, but an interim period of time working on the radio and communications, so that we kind of familiarize ourselves with police work and how to handle things. And we had a supervisor there that worked with us. And I went in to work at 8 p.m., and my wife called me at about 9 p.m. and said, I think I'm having labor pains. And so I said, be sure before you call me back again.
Let's be sure about this.
So she called back in about another half an hour and said, I really think that this is going to happen. And my supervisor and the radio sergeant was Ron Pasquale.
Oh my gosh, I remember
so
him.
Ron said, what's these calls about, And I knew that it was his responsibility to ask me. He was a supervisor. And so I said, my wife called me and saying she's got labor pains. And he said, well, get out of here. And I said, well, I'm afraid this is my first day at work.
Yeah.
And he says, I got you covered. And so I went home. My wife was in labor. I took her to the hospital, and my daughter Allison was born that day. So she was born the first day that I went to work on the police
Ron
department.
was a heck of a guy. Jim and I worked with him at WPRC.
Yes.
That was a few years ago, too.
Yeah, he had a great radio voice,
And by
too.
sheer coincidence, we've had your daughter, Allison, sitting in that guest chair as our guest on Viewpoint some time ago now.
Yep.
Several years. But in any event, I think it's interesting that we have here locally, the guy has a real fertile brain, he dreams up things. Now, in his first book, The Hung Jury, that, of course, for the benefit of those who are out there who might had their head in the sand, like that crazy ostrich on that Liberty commercial, which they come up with the dumbest commercials I've ever seen. In any event, I mean, they're really stupid. In any event, if you had your head in the sand and don't know it, Mr. Brewster wrote a very interesting book called The Hung Jury, and it's based on an actual episode we had here in Lincoln, Logan County, the Smirker case. A young man went berserk and had several killings before it was all said and done. And Tom wrote this book called Hung Jury, and I thought it was well written. notwithstanding this story, it had nothing to do with the story. I just think the way you crafted the book around the episodes and the incidents that took place was a professional job. And here was a neophyte author, and he's no longer a neophyte now. He's a certified author.
Yes.
So we're happy to have you up and talk about this second book. We're going to have to make sure that you said you hadn't gotten the book from your publisher yet?
No.
That's interesting.
It is interesting because last book they sent me free copies and I had them before the drop date, and this time I didn't, but it's a different world than what it was then. I mean, right now they've got a number. I think they've got 40 people in their offices, and most of them are out and they're working from home, and they got a situation where it's more difficult to get things out than what it was a few years back. So anyway, I wasn't disappointed that I didn't get one, but I'll be getting some books in a few days, and I know that some people have called me and told me already that they've got books they pre-ordered.
It's really interesting to me that we have an author here, and what I think, when I say the term Mayberry, I don't use that in a derogatory way. We're one of the Mayberries in the country, living in this great small community where a lot of people band together and get things done. But here we have an author in little old Lincoln, Illinois, who has written about an event at the Big Apple.
Right.
And I'm anxious to see this and read it. You've crafted a story around the terrible disaster of 9/11, which was just recently revisited, of course, on all the media. And I was reminded that day when Gene called me at work and said, get to a TV station so you can see. And I walked down the half a block to McIntyre's, walked in to get a TV on, so I saw part of that. And many of our listeners saw perhaps all of it. In any event, I find it very, very interesting and intriguing that an author here in Lincoln, Logan County has written about such a historical event worldwide, not just nationwide, worldwide. So, can you tell us when that egg was born? You first started to think about this concept.
Well, it's like I said before, the concept was in my mind that I thought somebody should write this book or a similar book like this. And in fact, I always thought that somebody should be involved in something like this because federal authorities' hands are tied in a lot of things. So that if you sort of kind of skirt the law a little bit, you can do a lot of stuff and that the police can't do. And this is the way that I approached it. I thought this was really a pretty honorable idea, fighting terrorism in the shadows and going around all the rules and regulations that you have to jump through in order to be able to enforce the laws. And so that was on my mind, and Dana and I, my wife, who happens to be my editor before I submit books, she always gets my spelling right and punctuation. And we went to New York City. We went to Ground Zero. We traveled around the city. We got to know a little bit about it. We were out there for a week, and I really enjoyed it. And when I came back, I had this book on my mind. And so I'm not really, that familiar with everything that goes on in New York City, but I'm familiar enough to be able to write the first couple of paragraphs about what it was like there on Ground Zero and what a person would feel, because I felt that same sort of sinking feeling when I stood there and realized all those souls were in the ground. Mm-hmm. So anyway, when I came back, I thought about writing this book, and I thought, well, how would somebody like me, an old cop, get involved in something like that if it were a reality? So I thought, well, I'll just blend these two old cops into this. And so I put them into the book, and they're sort of innocently drawn into this. They run into this our hero at the beginning of the book. And from there, they're all directed in the same direction. Even though the main character, the first character, he's not the main character, but the first character, the hero, he guides these old guys, unbeknownst to them, in the direction to be able to stop this terrorist event. And throughout the whole situation is how they got from our little town of Willoughby Hills to this situation in Florida was sort of pushed by this guy, and it all culminated in this big, horrendous gunfight at the Floor-Dixie truck stop in Florida.
And that's the name of the book.
And that's the name of the book.
Now, we're talking about fiction,
Dixie.
Tom, but there's something that's not fiction. It's real life here. Every time we sit down and start talking, I kind of forget we have somebody that sponsors these programs. And so we get going, and the first thing you know, geez, we got to take care of our sponsors.
Yeah, you gotta
so
make
go right ahead, Mr. Ash. Right back live in the studios here this morning, WLCN 96.3. Program, of course, is Viewpoint. We meet every Wednesday morning at 8:15 to 0900 hours. Again, Judith and I try hard to bring you different guests. Did I just say something wrong?
No, I just want to have a turn.
Oh.
I'm just waiting.
No, wait a minute. I'll work you in just a minute. Bear with us, folks. We'll get back on air. Judith and I work hard to try to bring different guests from around the area. Most of them are local. This morning we're particularly pleased and kind of proud to have a guest. We call him the John Grisham of Lincoln, an outstanding author, a good writer, a guy who crafts good stories. And Tom Brewster, if he's former policeman on Lincoln Police Department, and now Judith Busby wants to say she's raised her hand again, so go right ahead, Judith.
I was thinking you were mentioning before we came on the air about when you first started out as a policeman, and the police chief told you people that you got to shape up these reports that you give me. There's a way to write it, and there's a way not to do it. And he sent you to a class at Lincoln College, right?
He did.
Yeah. Now, did that whet your appetite at all for being an author, do you think, feed into it?
Well, it probably did in the long run. But when I wrote my first report, I was so ashamed of it I didn't want to turn it in. In fact, I'd written bare feet, B-E-A-R feet, in the report, and Larry Hill, who was another officer on that time, he made fun of me, and he raised his fingers like he was going to scratch me, and he growled after he read the report. And I thought, really, I got to do better than that. And so right from the start, I had a mind to write better reports. And then John Wadesky, who was really a good police chief, he was on top of everything, and he wanted us to be more professional. So he sent us to a class. He sent every policeman to a class at Lincoln College in report writing, and we all went. And so when the instructor asked us what we thought we deserved as a grade, Bob White, who was on my shift, and I always considered him my partner, great guy. He was the most gentle giant you ever met in your life. We both gave ourselves C's. And so about a week later, the chief calls me in his office, and he wanted to know if I was goofing off at the college in my report writing class. And I said, no, I was there for every class. I did my best, and I wanted to know why. And he said, well, everybody on the department got an A except for you and Bob White. So anyway, I did, and policemen have to write a lot of reports, and you have to be very detailed about the way that you write them, and you have to get right down to actually the minute. So if you get a call and you're such and such a place, you say, I'm at Woodlawn and Kankakee, and the time is 6:51, because that might make a big difference if time-related situation where that they want to prove that date and time and how long it took for you to get from one place to another. And you have to...
Things we don't think anything about at all.
No, you have to include all that stuff in your report so that if it comes back, you can look back and you can discredit somebody that says, well, I wasn't there at that time. I was somewhere else. Because, and if you didn't write your time down, you didn't get it correct, then, you were just guessing. But anyway, policemen have to be a little bit sharper than the average bear on that kind of stuff. And a lot of people see a squad car going down the street and they think it's just blowing taxpayer money out the tailpipe, but those guys are going somewhere and doing something all the time. And even in a town size of Lincoln, it seems peaceful. These guys are busy, protecting us, and they deserve all the credit in the world. But anyway, that's where I started getting the bug to write. I wanted my reports to be perfect, and I wanted them to be descriptive, and I think I got a lot of experience in how to write just from writing police reports.
Well, it sure took. It was a vaccination that seemed to take real well.
Yes.
I read your first book with great interest, and as I read it, of course, we all of us here in Lincoln, Logan County knew about the broad general background of that episodes plural, and but as I read it, I read into it, Judith. This guy is a good writer. He knows how to cogently put things together, and I'm down to reading about a book a week now. So Judith, she furnishes me the books. But she had read that book, and she said, "I think you'll find this interesting," and I did. I got that started, and I hardly put it down. So I'm not trying to stroke you, Tom, but for a country boy, you're a pretty good writer.
Well, I thank you very much.
Now, by the way, when did you first come to Lincoln, sir?
Well, I came to Lincoln probably in 1965. I went to work for Wayne Conradi out on Conradi's farm.
My goodness gracious.
Yeah, it was a long time ago, and I got to be pretty good friends with Wayne. And
he was a nice man.
Yes, he was. He told me, he said, the Lincoln Police Department's hiring. And I said, really? So I went and actually I contacted Jim Springer. He was a friend of mine too, and I rode around the squad car with him for a little bit. But Wayne wrote a letter of recommendation for me to go to work at the police department. I went and took the tests and everything and was able to get...
Now, in those days, did you go to Champaign for a little...
Yeah, we did. In fact, Lincoln was one of the first cities of our size that sent their employees to police training. A lot of guys just put them on the street.
Well, it was needed. All you knew was farm work.
Yeah, exactly.
And so...
it's a little different bailiwick, isn't it?
By the way, here we are. We're almost about halfway through the doggone program. We've never used the 648-5510. 648-5510 is the number to call. Anybody has any questions for Tom Brewster or comments? Be nice to him. He's an older fellow now.
He's just a kid, right?
Yeah, in my book, he's just a kid. You can bet on that. So,
is this writing, does it become a bit addictive now that you've got your second book going? Are you thinking about, next time I think I might write about this?
Well, I'm pretty limited to what I can write about. They always say write about what you know. And I know a little about growing up and getting involved in, all kinds of trouble and avoiding the police. And then I know about becoming a police officer, and I've been pretty much in that grain of work for my whole life. So it's hard for me to write about something else, but I know a lot about police work, and I know about the diversity of personalities and the way that people react to things. And I just study people anyway. And so I pretty much got to stick with that. I can't write some story about things that I don't know anything about. So
well, it takes a lot of research. Now, in the hung jury, research per se wasn't nearly as necessary because you had experienced part of that as part of your professional career. in this book, Flora Dixie, that requires a little know-how about how to go about getting facts and figures. I know the book is fictional,
Yes.
but it's based on a real-life incident, and therefore, how does one go about starting to get the facts and figures that it needs to have to
Well,
create a book?
It's pretty much the same thing.
Detective work.
Yeah, it is more or less sort of detective work and getting lucky on what you do. I know how you need to get lucky sometimes to be able to solve a crime. And a lot of this in the book, the two older guys that get involved and they end up meshing with the original character in this. And I know how people react, and I know how when you're in over your head, things that you would do, and I know the ins and outs of police work and how a person would gain information when actually they're not really on the inside anymore. And so my two older guys in this, they use their connections with the police department back home and telephone calls to find out information that they need to know, and then they follow up just like a detective would trying to solve a crime. And so they're pretty much relying on things that I know about. They're calling back to the police station, talking to the sergeant that's on duty, and having things run through the police records, on their computers, and talks a lot about police work and that kind of thing as it goes through. And so the reaction that they have to what's going on is that they're trying to struggle to find their way along the way to be able to get involved in this final battle that takes place and to avoid being killed in the process.
Don't you kind of, as a policeman, have to be part psychologist?
Well, I think so.
Oh, yeah.
When you
sure
get a
of that.
call to someone's house where the neighbors have called and you got a couple of people that are fighting so loud that you can hear them, next door to the house next door, and you walk in on it, that might be the worst situation that these two people have ever had, where the police need to be called. And I think you got to have the psychology and the presence of mind to know that these people are having a hard time and that it's not criminal what's going on at that point. You got to be able to stand in between them, and you got to be able to try to resolve this situation without it getting any worse or being detrimental to them for the rest of their lives. If you can imagine that a police officer shows up at your door and you're a law-abiding citizen, and all of a sudden you're involved in such a heated argument with your wife or someone else that the police come, that might be the biggest thing that's happened to you in
You're
a
talking
long
a
time.
significant
Right.
emotional
so
event.
I think these
Could be a
guys,
tipping point for some.
right, these guys have to be, a little bit, compassionate, and they have to understand what to say and what they can't say. And the bad rap that policemen are getting nowadays that police are just out there bullying people around. That's the farthest thing from the truth. When somebody calls for a police officer to come to your house, then they are there to really resolve the problem, not to, inflame it. And so
Right.
you do I think the guys do have to, and some people are better at it than others, but I think that they have to be a little bit of a psychologist to be able to get through these things and be able to resolve all these problems. Got the utmost respect for the guys that are working here and everywhere on the police department. And it's kind of a sore subject right now with me, the things that I see going on. But anyway, I'm good with the police, 100% behind them.
Well, I think that's entirely right. This business of calling for defunding police departments, that's a bunch of poppycock.
It is.
Who are you going to call? The grocer?
Well, I'm glad she cleaned that up, Jim.
It gives you something to write about, too.
Judith and I are, in a really minor way, a part of the media, per se. But I blame the media generally for many of our problems that we have today. We have got so-called, well, of course, down through the ages, the press has always been somewhat liberal. They've gotten more so, or maybe it's my perspective because I've gotten older and more crotchety. But I blame the media for a lot of our problems that we have today. And I exclude you and I and Jim Ash from that.
Oh, I thought you were excluding us from being problems. I was so grateful.
We're excluding ourselves from being part of the problem. It takes a fertile mind to write a book. And I'm sitting here opposite Tom Brewster, and I see things he's got the gears whirling and in mesh, and every once in a while he shifts gears and he goes into high. And that's what happens when you sit down to write a book. Do you write a lot of books at night as you go to sleep?
Well, I'll tell you, when I wrote The Hung Jury, I'm still working, I'm still out there, contacting people and going to courthouse and that kind of thing. And sometimes there's dry spells where you have to wait. And I always took a pad and pencil with me, and when I'm sitting waiting for somebody, I'll write. And then at night, go home, put it on my computer, and if it fits in the story that I'm going for, then I polish it up a little bit, and I write like that. But my wife, I don't like TV that much. But my wife watches TV, and we like to be in the same room with each other. And so she'll watch TV, and I'll sit on the couch, and I'll write, and I'll get my computer out, and I'll write. But I don't have any specific time or place where I write. I just write wherever it hits me, So
I just wondered as you lay in bed. At one point in time, I was very active in my profession, and was called upon to make speeches from time to time, and I wrote a lot of them in bed. Then I'd get up in the morning and kind of coalesce what I had been dreaming or putting together all night, and that seemed to work. And by the way, I gave the shortest and the best speech ever given at a national convention. I was told it was the best, and I know it was the shortest. We were on a cruise in the Caribbean, or Caribbean, whichever you want to say. And in the event, we got into some high seas, and I mean, it was really rough. And the day I was scheduled to make my appearance, we were in especially rough waters, and I got up to the rostrum in front of the microphone, and as the ship bow would go down, I'd kind of go with it. And if the ship rolled, I rolled with it. And I did that for maybe 35 or 40 seconds and cut my hands to my mouth and left the room. And nobody wanted to be there anyway.
Yeah,
so anyway, I was given the accolades of having the best speech at the convention.
Well, everybody got it.
But in any event, I only mention this in a general way because when I was doing that, I'd go to bed at night and think about what I wanted to say, and those thoughts would go through my mind, and that's how I wrote, quote, a lot of my work that I did at that time. So I wondered if, in the process of your writing, as the ideas come to you as you're trying to go to sleep?
Well, sometimes they do, and I'll wake up in the middle of the night sometimes, and I'll just go scratch out a couple of sentences that I thought of. But what you were talking about, Ernest Hemingway said anybody can write. All you have to do is sit down in front of a typewriter and bleed. Mm-hmm. So you have to kind of show your insides a little bit. You kind of have to not only display your ability to write, the quality of your writing, you kind of got to expose yourself a little bit too. Your way of thinking and your sort of what makes you tick too. And that's the hard part for me. I don't want to give up too much of me in the process. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of have to, skirt around some of that stuff too, because you could get off, on a tangent and write a bunch of stuff that nobody cares about.
Easily. The same thing can be said for speech writing. 648-5510. Our guest this morning, Mr. Tom Brewster. Some of you, many of you, I'm sure, have written or read his book that he wrote. The first book that he wrote, A Hung Jury, had to do with local activities here, a true story, tragedies that happened. and he was involved with that, and he wrote a very, very interesting book. So it's not too late to get a hung jury. And the newest book that has come out, and it's not yet quite on the shelves, is what's the name of that book?
The Road to Flora-Dixie.
The Road to Flora-Dixie. Now,
do you have the seeds in your mind for its successor?
Well, I don't think I could go somewhere with it, but I moved on and wrote another book that's also going to be published by the same publisher. They bought that. And they also took, I told you before when we had our first interview out here about a year ago or a year and a half, something like that I was trying to find a publisher for the book that my daughter had self-published for me called The Great American Novel. And they're going to republish that too. So I got 2 books that are in the hangar for next year sometime. So.
Well, step aside William Maxwell.
Well, I was going to talk about William Maxwell, because he's our local, nationally world-known writer. And when I wrote the book to the hung jury, it's not a true story. It's got sort of the same chronology as the events that happened, and I was privy to all of that. But William Maxwell wrote his book, and he didn't have the details on what went down, but he knew the chronology of it, and he wrote, well, what if? Sort of a book. Mm-hmm. I just read it again last week. And so that's kind of like the hung jury. It's a what if book. I don't know what was in the mind of Russell Smirker, but I created this character that...
You created a really evil character, too, Tom.
Because I really believed that Russell Smirker was evil, but I really don't know what was in his mind. But I created this character, and I put evil in his mind. And then the incidents, the way that they happened, I had no idea. I thought this is the way it might have happened. So the hung jury was based sort of on a chronology of the things that went down involving all those murders, but it was a sort of a what if it happened like this book. So it wasn't really true. It's just kind of based on a chronology of the events of that Russell Smirker.
648-5510. This is about your last chance, folks, to get a chance to talk with Tom Brewster. Man is he's got a fertile brain, and he knows how to move from his brains into the paper. And that's a trick, by the way.
Well, you've proven that you're nobody's dummy, I'll tell you.
Well, thank you.
He proved that on the street before he started writing.
There you go.
He was one of our good officers. There again, I happened to see a fellow the other day in a drugstore. I don't know who the gentleman was, but he was wearing a police uniform, sheriff, I don't know. And I said, does anybody thank you from time to time? He says, not often. And I said, well, that's the thing to do. And I fist bumped with him, and we need to support these boys and ladies. We forget there are ladies out there serving the uniform too. They never know when they go to work, even right here in Lincoln-Logan County, the danger that might come up the next shift that they're on. So remember that, folks. Doff your hat to them. Say something to them. Don't bother them. They've got their work to do. Tom, this book, The Road to Flora-Dixie, when will it be for sale here in Lincoln-Logan County?
Well, I don't know the date. It's for sale right now on all the major book sites, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, Books A Million, Target, and I don't know how long it'll be till they actually put it on the shelf. Mm-hmm. But it's a traditional publisher. They're a publishing house, so it will be in the bookstores. But if you want to get it right now, you can get it on Kindle. You can get it on all the ebook sites, and you can get it. You can order it in 2 days. They say that they'll have it to you. So if you want to get the Road to Flora-Dixie, it's out there right now, available. And a lot of people.
And he gets a nickel or two off of every time you buy a book. So go ahead, folks, loosen up and buy this book, The Road to Flora-Dixie. I'm looking forward to getting a hold of it myself, and I won't have to come to get your books this next week. Judith asked, and you alluded to the fact you have several, or maybe 2 or 3 more, that are kind of floating around in the back of that gray matter of yours. You make a decision, and well, I'm going to sit down and write this.
Yep, I do, and I'm working on a book right now. It's called The Confession, and I've written myself into a corner where that I've got two of my characters. They've come to a point where they're in such trouble that they can't get out of it. And I don't know how to write these guys out of this, so I might have to give up on it.
You're trying to save them now, huh?
Yeah, I'm trying to save them, but it's so deep and so convoluted and so involved that I can't write them out of it. And I asked my wife, and she's a really good writer herself. She won't ever write because she doesn't want to expose her feelings. But I asked her, how do I write these guys out of this? And she just couldn't come up with anything either. So we're both stumped, so I might just have to put that one aside until...
By the way, I might suggest that when I appeared at her door, I went there yesterday to see Tom. She didn't offer me a Tom and Jerry. Your house is noted for the fellow that owned that house, Hugh Hunter. He was an old attorney, really quirky, and every Christmas he'd serve Tom and Jerry's, and that was the neighborhood thing. Everybody went there. So the next time I rap on your door, I want a Tom and Jerry.
Well, you'll get it. I'll have to find out exactly what it is first.
Tom, I have no idea what the heck a Tom and Jerry is, but it's a Christmas drink.
Well, find a Norwegian and they'll show you.
Our guest this morning was Tom Brewster. Really, I said this almost ad nauseum. I don't want to beat it to death, but he's an excellent writer. So get his book, The Road to Fort Dixie. It's available online right now, and it'll soon be hitting the shelves. Appreciate you taking your time, Tom, to come up with us.
Well, I thank you, Bill, and Judy, I thank you too. Jim, appreciate you letting me come to your radio station.
We'll close the way we always do. Be the reason somebody smiles today. Thank you very much for Viewpoint.